Welcome to today's video, The Inner Game of Tennis, how a book about tennis can help us be better singers, students, and people. So, as you may have guessed, today's video is about the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, the classic guide to the mental side of peak performance by Timothy Galway. Now, despite the title of this book, it's not exactly a book about tennis. There's a lot of wisdom in this little short book. It teaches us how to learn, it teaches us how to stop trying too hard, it teaches us how to overcome performance anxiety. It teaches us how to concentrate and it teaches us how to break bad habits. So, this is an excellent book that I would highly recommend to you. It's just a little over 100 pages long. It won't take too long to read. For the purposes of this video, I've just selected a couple of ideas from the book to discuss with you. And I've sort of translated some of the ideas into voice lesson applicable material. So we won't talk too much about tennis, but the main thoughts or ideas still apply. Um, it's not a summary of the book. So, what I'll do is I'll link some summaries that I used as a reference in the description of this YouTube video. But again, this book is super easy to read, it goes by quickly. So, I'd encourage you to check it out for yourself. So, lesson one is that peak performance comes from stilling the mind. And I'll read you this quote right here from the book. It is the constant thinking activity of self one, the ego mind, which causes interference with the natural doing processes of self two. Harmony between the two selves exists when the mind itself is quiet. Only when the mind is still is one's peak performance reached. So, really, a big chunk of this book is about learning how to allow the voices inside your head to kind of work in tandem with one another. So, Galway defines self one, the conscious mind, as the teller. So, this is kind of the voice inside your head that may say, why would you say a thing like that? Or you really need to do this. Or wow, you really rocked that last solo. Okay, so it's kind of the chatty part of your brain, the ego. Whereas self two is the unconscious mind or the doer. This is the part of your brain that gets up and goes to get a glass of water without much instruction, or the part of your brain that picks up a tube of lip gloss without instruction from self one. So we have the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. So, when we're learning a new process, whether that's tennis or voice or a new sport or a board game, self one is often interfering, controlling, or judging self two. So, in order to attain mental peak performance, we actually have to allow self one and self two to work in tandem with the other. And this takes three things. Okay. We'll talk more about this in depth in the next slides. But first, we have to learn to program your computer self to with images rather than instruction or words. So, self two needs images to learn, not a lecture from self one. Number two, we have to learn to trust thyself, right? Trust self two to do what self one is asking of it. And this is important. It's important to take a moment here and say that self two is a highly refined computer software system, right? It's breathing in this very moment without you having to instruct it. It's capable of a lot more than we give it credit for. So allowing self to really do what self one is asking without interference. And then number three is learning to see non judgmentally. That is to see what is happening rather merely noticing how well or how badly it is happening. So these are the quotes from the book here. So give your brain images. I'll read this quote here. So the primary role of self one, the teller, the voice, is to set goals for self two, then to let self two perform. It is basic to good communication that we use the most suitable language. The native tongue of self two is imagery, sensory images. Movements are learned through visual and feeling images. So self too is not really going to respond to your instruction with words or your indictment that it needs to do better or your demands. That's not really the language that self two speaks. Self two, or your unconscious mind, actually responds to images. So the images that he lists in the book are more geared toward tennis, of course. So I thought I would offer some imagery tools for that specifically apply to singing. So you could watch a professional singer on YouTube perform your piece and then ask self to, hey, could you approach this high note the way such and such singer sings it? And give your brain the image that you see on YouTube to latch onto. That could be a silent, open throated breath. It doesn't have to be a high note. It could be any sort of technical thing that you're working on. Watch that professional singer demonstrate it and invite self to approach it that way. This is this next one is a great idea from the book. It's kind of role playing essentially. You want to imagine that you are playing a role of a professional singer in a movie. So you kind of trick your brain into thinking that you can do this with confidence, with relaxation, without any kind of self doubt or tension. That can be a great way to kind of retrain self to with images. You can visualize your breath constantly in motion. This is another tool that we'll talk about later in the conversation. And you can visualize yourself performing a specific phrase or moment and ask self to do that as well. So those are some ideas about for giving your brain images instead of lectures. Self one wants to lecture, but really self one's role is to give self two a goal. And then self two needs the images to attain that goal. The next thing we want to talk about is letting go of judgment. And here Galway says, quote, when the mind is free of any thought or judgment, it is still and acts like a mirror. Then and only then can we know things as they are. So, both good and bad judgments really color our thinking and color our ability to learn. When we are free from judgment, we can see things objectively. So, while you may think that you're actually being a really good teacher to yourself when you say, that was really bad, and you kind of wag your finger at something, or that was really, really good, what you're actually doing is reinforcing this sort of judgmental approach to learning. What we want to do instead is sort of suspend judgment in the learning process, just in the learning process, suspend judgment and look at things objectively and without the emotional response of good or bad. Lesson number 2 that I wanted to discuss with you is that peak performance comes from learning to focus on the present. And this is huge in his book. And I love this quote. Concentration is said to be the master art because all other arts depend on it. Progress in this, as in any art, progress in this, as in any art, is achieved only through practice. So we have to practice concentrating. I have found tennis an enjoyable arena for practicing concentration, but there is, in fact, no life situation where one cannot practice focusing one's full attention on what is happening at the moment. So he essentially says that relaxed concentration on the present moment is a skill needed for all of life and that it takes time and practice. It's not something you just wake up doing. So, this is where learning how to focus on the breath all the time consistently, especially when you notice that self one kind of commenting on what's going on. Learning how to focus on the breath is an excellent way to stay present. And when we have these sort of mental freakouts, he describes them, these chit chats in our brain where we're either thinking too hard about the past or thinking too much about the future or getting flustered about something that's not going right in the current moment. When we actually learn to focus on the present moment, we're relying on internal resources rather than demanding from our external circumstances. So, freedom from mental freakouts happens as one's peace of mind becomes more and more a function of inner resources and less dependent on externals. Letting go means allowing joy to come into your life instead of contriving to have a good time. Learning to appreciate the love and beauty already happening around you rather than trying to manufacture something which you think isn't there. So rather than kind of chatting in our brain about past mistakes or being anxious and nervous about what's to come or wanting to try and control and manipulate something frustrating currently that we can't change, we can instead practice our internal resources to calm our mind. Now, this is part of why I really encourage my students to develop a meditation practice. That's a huge internal resource. Prayer is a great resource for learning how to calm the mind, as well as journaling or yoga. Breath exercises are great, and gratitude practices really help ground us in the moment. Lesson 3, this is huge. Treat challenges as friends. Okay, so challenges, trouble, or competition invite you to refine your skills and improve your knowledge. Embrace challenges as opportunities to grow and develop into the best version of yourself possible, rather than obstacles to avoid or overcome. I once went to a funeral of somebody that I really respect, and his wife came up and spoke, or maybe it was his daughter came up and spoke about some of the things that her father had taught him. And that was one of the things that she said is that he taught her to invite trouble in as a friend, invite difficult circumstances in as a friend, because those situations really cause you to become the best person that you can be. They really refine you. And the this is analogous to a surfer waiting for a big wave to come in. So I'll read this quote from the book. The surfer waits for the big wave because he values the challenge it presents. He values the obstacles the wave puts between him and his goal of riding the wave to the beach. Why? Because it is those very obstacles, the size and churning power of the wave, which draw from the surfer his greatest effort. It is only against the big waves that he is required to use all his skill, all his courage and concentration to overcome. Only then can he realize the true limits of his capacities. At that point, he often slips into a superconscious state and attains his peak. In other words, the more challenging the obstacle he faces, the greater the opportunity for the surfer to discover and extend his true potential. The potential may have always been within him, but until it is manifested in action, it remains a secret hidden from himself. The obstacles are a very necessary ingredient to this process of self discovery. Note that the surfer in this example is not out to prove himself. He is not out to show himself or the world how great he is, but he is simply involved in the exploration of his latent capacities. So, challenges really do draw out from you your latent capacities, your latent potentials. So, invite trouble in as a friend. The final thing, the final lesson I want to convey to you from this book is patience and gentleness with yourself. So, we really want to learn how to be patient and gentle with ourselves as we grow and develop. And this also helps us learn to be patient and gentle with those that we're teaching or mentoring or helping along in their journey as well. And the story he kind of uses to describe this patient, gentle observation is planting a rose seed. And this will be the last quote that I read to you. So read along with me. When we plant a rose seed in the earth, we notice that it is small, but we do not criticize it as rootless and stemless. We treat it as a seed, giving it the water and nourishment required of a seed. When it first shoots up out of the earth, we don't condemn it as immature or underdeveloped, nor do we criticize the bud for not being open when they appear. nor do we praise it really for that matter either. We just notice it. We stand in wonder at the process taking place and give the plant the care it needs at each stage of its development. The rose is a rose from the time it is a seed to the time it dies. Within it, at all times, it contains its whole potential. It seems to be constantly in the process of change, yet at each state, at each moment, it is perfectly all right as it is. So, as you're growing and learning how to sing and learning how to become an adult and learning how to learn, you really want to treat yourself that way. You want to treat yourself as perfectly all right as you are. I hope this conversation today was helpful. I hope it encourages you to read the book on your own. And happy singing, happy learning, and happy practicing.